Welcome everybody. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. My name is Bradley Hiller. I'm from the Islamic Development Bank and work in the Climate Change and Environment Division. And I'll guide you through today's session with our speakers and panellists. This session today is called Innovative Financing Partnerships for Localised Solutions to Climate Change, Public Banks, Islamic Finance and Philanthropy, which I think will be an interesting combination of discussion topics. So firstly, to set the scene, let me begin with some statistics. Firstly, the overall financing gap to achieve the SDGs stands at about US $4.2 trillion. So let that sink in just for a moment. There's a huge gap there. Secondly, as we know, many developed countries have promised $100 billion in climate finance each year for developing countries, but this target was not met on time. And in the meantime, significant additional financing is also needed. And thirdly, from my philanthropic colleagues, less than 2% of global philanthropy in 2020 was targeted towards climate action, less than 2%, so very low there. So in response, there is an increasing consensus around reforms of the international financial system, including a strong focus on enhancing climate finance. In this regard, there is a great value in bringing together diverse partners and exploring financial resources, both from the private and philanthropic sectors, as well as better targeting public financing. There is opportunity to leverage existing modes of finance, and I think also for blending different modes of financing as well. Today's session includes two innovative climate financing modalities, philanthropy and Islamic finance. And I think before our colleagues go into a detailed discussion on these, please let me just briefly define both those terms. So firstly, philanthropy refers to the practice of giving time, money, experience, skills and/or talent, all with the altruistic objective of improving human welfare. It includes individual giving by everyday givers and the high net worth individuals, or institutional giving through corporates, foundations and other specialised institutions. Islamic finance, for those not as familiar, is recognised as a key enabler for achieving social goals. Islamic finance is an equity-based, sustainable, Sharia-compliant finance system that emphasises financial inclusion and social welfare. Some key principles include prohibiting interest on transactions and on ethically problematic investments, ensuring a link to real assets and risk-sharing of environmentally and socially responsible finance. Today's session brings together Philanthropic Network Organisation, WINGS, and the Arab Foundations Forum, or AFF, the Islamic Development Bank, and also a Ministry of Finance representative as well. The structure of our session includes a keynote speech, followed by a panel discussion, and then opportunity for audience questions. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce our keynote speaker, Naila Faruqi, CEO of the Arab Foundations Forum. Naila has over 20 years' experience in project management, media production and strategic communication, and is a Peabody award-winning executive who has built a career across several continents. Following several years at Sesame Workshop, where she produced local adaptations of the iconic children's education program Sesame Street, Naila assumed the role of CEO at AFF in 2014. Since then, she has helped grow the network in over 10 countries across the region, with a network of members representing the rich ecosystem of philanthropy, non-profit, civil society and development actors. Naila has been published in several peer-reviewed journals and has contributed to academic research and data on the Arab philanthropy sector. Naila, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bradley. Thanks everyone for joining us. And also thank you very much to the ISDB, really, for allowing us to host this conversation with WINGS, and for all the speakers for joining us today. So I'm not giving a keynote, that's for sure, but I am going to give just some framing remarks so that we can kind of get into the conversation. So part of why we really wanted to have this discussion and this dialogue is, for us in the Arab kind of philanthropy space, we've been struggling with how to put climate on the agenda of Arab philanthropy. And this has been a struggle that's taken a couple of years. We started as AFF, Arab Foundations Forum, back in 2017, having discussions with our network, or trying to have discussions with our network about what was the Arab philanthropy space doing about climate, and we weren't doing very much. We weren't actually even having these conversations. And it's taken a couple of years for us to try to galvanize the sector around, if not necessarily, pivoting away from what they're doing, but at least looking at climate as a strategic objective for their funding. And so for us as a network, we decided to kind of maybe manipulate it a little bit, and sometimes, you have to take people to where you need them to be rather than expect them to get there on their own. And that's part of the role of what a network is there to do, right? I mean, we're there to encourage conversations, and we're there to encourage action. So we've actually established climate as one of our 4 strategic objectives and programmatic objectives at AFF. So they include climate, data, youth, and enabling environment. And so we see this as a very key and critical conversation to be having. And we want to talk a little bit, and this is why we have these wonderful speakers with us, is we want to talk a little bit about what are the varying different avenues that philanthropy can take to help support the climate agenda. Philanthropy tends to be a little bit more agile, it's more nimble, it can adapt, and it can kind of address needs that are critical at times that maybe some other sectors might have a little bit more difficulty and might have the momentum slowed down by whatever bureaucracies are set in place. And we realize that at least for the Arab region, and that's the region I would speak to, we know that our region is heating up almost twice as fast as anywhere else in the world. So this is not only a critical conversation to be having, but there are critical actions that need to be taken. And so this is why, for us, it's very important to have this conversation and to hopefully have you guys also ask us some questions and ask our speakers some questions to help guide the conversation a little bit further. And then hopefully all this will translate into some actionable steps that we can take moving forward. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll start with our panelists. So we have 4 panelists sitting with us. Adama, hi. So Adama Mariko is the Secretary General of the Finance in Common initiative, and I'm just going to introduce the 4 of you, and then I'll start asking questions. After that, we have Engineer Mohammed Asati, the Special Advisor to His Excellency the President of the Islamic Development Bank. After that, Benjamin Beligi, who is the Executive Director of Wings, who I know very well, so there's no reason why I should be stumbling on this. And then after that, we have Ivan Oliveira, who's the Deputy Secretary for Sustainable Development and Finance from the Ministry of Finance in Brazil. So welcome to all 4 of you. Men, only men sitting at the panel, but that's okay. I'll forgive you. Huh? Well, not me, but I'm not one of the panelists. Malish. Okay. So, Adam, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. I'll put you on the spot. So, at the summit on New Global Financing Pact in Paris in June, the world leaders put forward a vision for multilateral development banks to work more in a more integrated way on a system, and also in cooperation with regional and national development banks, as well as UN agencies and philanthropies, so to form kind of the heart of a wider global financial architecture. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about how do you think we can develop a global framework for sustainable investment that leverages alternative financial flows, such as philanthropy or Islamic charitable giving, towards achieving the SDGs and tackling climate change.
All right. Thank you very much for this question. I think it's also a way for me to explain why public development banks, and I'm speaking here for 530 public development banks, right? And of course, Islamic development banks is here. And I've met many of my colleagues, fellow development bankers. We all agree on one aspect. The collaboration is definitely, growing up, but we still need to strengthen this. We have several, thematic coalitions where people, discuss on their issues on agriculture, energy, etc., etc. But what we have seen is that there is still a fragmentation within the development space where multilateral development banks, have access to this global fora, and not mainly the national development banks that finally, there are those who are in direct contact with the need of their governments, but also with their populations. So finance in common is the place where all these banks have took the wheel to also speak as one voice within the international financial architecture space, but not just among banks, to also open synapses, discuss with other stakeholders that also are organizing themselves. Looks like private sector, when you take the G funds, after the COP26, there was this creation of a group of private finance members, committing to net zero. You also have within the philanthropic area, coalitions like Wings, but also broader ones, to also seek on a global voice on how we can work better with other stakeholders. So that's what we succeeded to do in Paris. I think it's just a first step on how we concretely go from this global commitment in a concrete projects level. And that's where also I think public development banks have some argument to bring in these discussions. The total balance sheet of all the public development banks in the world is $23 trillion. But just this is summing up banks that don't often have any connection between them, right? You cannot compare what the development bank from Colombia do with the development bank in Malaysia somehow. But my point is if you look at this balance sheet and the annual commitment, what they bring every year in the financing space, is 2.5 trillion of new financing every year. So whether we are still looking for more money to solve climate issue or biodiversity issues, or we take the decision to shift the mandate of those banks in a transformative way where they put priority this money on aligned projects, on projects that are sustainable and moving from carbonate economy to more sustainable economy. So to do that, often what we hear is there is several problems, and by problems we are still speaking about some market failures where you still have public money to help building those projects. I think that's where the connection should be made with the philanthropic area. Often you look at private sector or hearing them say, okay, there is a money, but there is no enough bankable projects. Or there is a money, but there is not de-risking solutions, et cetera, et cetera. So we keep listing the problems, right? But what we should do right now, and what I think the paper and the solutions that emerged in Paris during the New Financial Pact Summit, is to say, okay, this is a global, financial architecture. Banks have comparative advantages. I'm speaking about public banks. You have access to concessional money, so how you can leverage your balance sheet to put it prioritarily on where market failures are, on agriculture, on social investment, et cetera, et cetera. But to find those new solutions, we need also private actors that are willing to put their money on helping the innovation to emerge. And I think that's where the collaboration between the banks and the philanthropic area can be fostered. For example, we are launching in 2 days now, from now, the Financial Innovation Lab, which is a decision from the last Finance in Common Summit. And this Financial Innovation Lab is a place where we think that banks can share not only solutions they have found, but also share definitely the problematics they have on how we structure a deal with a country to help out on debt for nature swaps or local currency issues, et cetera, et cetera. But to put this lab on a public good where we share all those knowledges, but the help we need is to have philanthropic and area to come up and help us, bring the seed on also the test they have in some countries where they can help on, starting up what banks can also scale up afterwards.
So I have a follow-up question for you, just to kind of bring it down a little bit to a more accessible, information. So one of the biggest things that we often talk about when we're talking about forming partnerships within, from philanthropy to philanthropy and then philanthropy with other sectors, is translating the making the case for why philanthropy needs to get involved, but then also looking at what is the information that the other sectors need from philanthropy to be able to bring them in? Because in many ways, you're talking about things that are at a technical level that may not be, translatable.
Yeah, I think the first, and I'm saying by practice, not at this global frame of financing common stuff, etc. I am also within the French Development Agency, Deputy Executive Director for Mobilisation and Partnerships. So while we're speaking about mobilization, we have a multi-stakeholder partnership frame, and the strategy here is to just say the balance sheet of the bank is not sufficient, and we have to do mobilization and co-finance projects with others, make them delegate funds to us, and we have noticed 2 or 3 points, I think, that can foster the language and the translation between a bank with another actor. First of all, you need to, to what we call, to put yourself at the place of the other partner. And somehow, when you have another partner willing to give you the money, they need, some stuff. Clarity on where you invest it, and also to be sure that you are not just doing it for yourself, by yourself, but you are sure that they also have return on the impact valorization that they have here. And I think that's fair. It's a fair game. And the second problem we have noticed while doing it is also within the bank we have to also change the culture of how we mobilize capital, because somehow we had a lot of engineers, bankers that are really used to use their own balance sheet and not put themselves in a place that someone else is telling them, okay, how I need things to be done. And that is really a cultural change in the translation. And I think the third point is, to be really open about the data of, how you guys do the investment that can be used by the philanthropic entity itself for scaling up with others. And I think if we don't do that, it won't work. You will test something, but it would never scale. So, and we have noticed this. We started, I'm going to name some people. So with, Gates Foundation, for example. We took like 3 years, like 4 years, before doing one project. When we started the first project, the rhythm is like going in a pace where they know how we work, so they can even just find out for solutions. You guys, what do we have here? We have this problem, etc., etc. Okay, this is 23 million for you to do it with us. And it accelerates the way we are working, because everyone is in confidence, and they can use the data of what we do to do it with others as well. I think those are examples also for banks to improve themselves and improve the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly what I was asking for. And I think, it's the two things that really ring true for me from what you're saying is data is huge, and having it accessible, and also just having access to it, and for us in philanthropy, we know that that's one of our biggest barriers. And then just this whole kind of localization, the idea of bringing local players to the table to be more inclusive. So I'm going to turn it to Engineer Mohammed Assati. And I just, we know about the potential of Islamic finance. We know that it's touted as equity-based, it's sustainable, Sharia-compliant banking, and it emphasizes this inclusion that we're talking about, right? And it emphasizes social welfare. So I'm just curious if you would be able to give us some examples of how Islamic social finance products that support the SDGs, and specifically, obviously, to this conversation, support the SDGs around climate.
Thank you, Naila. Good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I'm sure just maybe little about the Islamic Development Bank. being one of the MDBs, and also it's the MDB of the Muslim world. It's a MDB that's serving 57 countries and even non-member countries. And it's also, the statistics show that we're serving 1 in 5 people globally. Also, what's unique about the bank is it's a South-South organization. That's very, very unique, and I think it's the largest organization when it comes to being South organization, and also being the largest Islamic development institution. Now, putting all of these things together, that what makes ISDB, and again, its group of affiliates, unique in serving, globally, especially when it comes to social, equality, etc. Now, aside, I will not get into the normal, the normal way of doing business, like the dealing with the countries, but focusing on when it comes to the social Islamic products. There are many, but let me maybe share with you, historically, the zakat and sadaqah is well known in the Muslim world, where it's like every Muslim is allocating part of his income annually for good cause, for zakah. At the same time, sadaqah, which is for a goodwill. Now, there are programs being developed by the bank with some philanthropy, with some society, to encourage the use of sadaqah and zakat in doing projects, programs, helping societies, and again, adhering with the I would say, top areas within the SDGs, equality, no hunger, etc. So this is just one product. Another product, which I'm sure you have heard of, is awqaf or waqf. Waqf, it's like an endowment, but there are 2 types here. We have a program in the bank called the APIF, which is the Awqaf Property Investment Fund, where we have partners with us. And here, what we're looking for, we're seeking, for example, properties or lands that are waqf or endowment. And then this program developed this land, and then for a good cause. It will stay forever as a waqf. The income goes into good causes, helping, charity, helping the needy. And this is also another source of really helping in a way. The other type is in waqf, which is endowment, where sometimes you can have a fund and you keep it as an endowment. You maintain the principal, however, the proceeds of that one or the investment on that one, which is we consider it as grant, then we can use this also for some of our social services like health, education, where sometimes the concessional funding is not really widely available. Now, another thing, when we're talking about blending, by the way, there are examples of blending normally, like between IFIs, between MDBs, between the two. But also, sometimes blending can involve philanthropy. And a good example is the Life and Livelihood Fund, which has been generated or established between the Islamic Development Bank, the Islamic Solidarity Fund, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where we have also other institutions, King Salman Center, which is mainly a humanitarian organization, Abu Dhabi Fund, and Qatar Fund. And by the way, maybe just if I take a couple of minutes, maybe I share this story with some of the colleagues in here. This LLF started with the polio vaccination or polio eradication in Pakistan, where the Gates Foundation were involved in there, but for one reason or the other, they had difficulties because of political reasons. At the same time, the government of Pakistan was seeking help from the bank. They were looking for, I would say, 200 million grants funding, which unfortunately, we don't have that much money. We offered a ordinary financing, which they did not do because this is polio. Anyhow, just to cut the long story short, we joined with the Gates Foundation and the government of Pakistan, where we extended a loan to the government of Pakistan. And the cost of the funding was paid to the bank by the Gates Foundation, and we call it a triple win. So the government won a 200 million, if you want to call it, interest-free loan. We were able to help our member countries for a good cause, which is the polio, and for a good cause. At the same time, the Gates Foundation were able the money that was paid as the cost of funding, which is considerably, I would say, a fraction from the loan that the benefit that we all three institutions benefit from helping in eradication of polio in Pakistan was great. And we call it a triple win or a buy down. Building on that, we started this journey of the LLF, which is the Life and Livelihood Fund with the Gates Foundation. And thank God we finished phase 1 with good success. And now we're about to launch another phase of the LLF, which is Life and Livelihood Fund. And by the way, maybe my colleagues I always tell them that the Arabic name of the LLF, which is Al-Aisha wal-Maisha, is a patent of this poor man, because it came on a brainstorming session. So these are some products. I'm sure there are others, that I can share with you later on. But at the end of the day, all of these products go into helping in financing, social services, and you can see the merger between philanthropy, IFIs, the bank, Islamic finance, all together.
And I think, thank you so much for that overview, because that's really, what's very interesting for me about this is there's so little understanding of the adaptability of Islamic finance models. These are models that have been around for centuries, and they're often kind of set aside as something that's traditional versus but you really have been able to bring it kind of into a more modern manifestation and use these really wonderful kind of values of Islamic financing to be able to address these issues. And I'm just curious, one other thing, you've talked about the Gates Foundation and that that partnership around the eradication of polio in Pakistan, and that's amazing. But my question is more around the ISDB's interaction with philanthropy regionally. Is that a formal kind of, are there formal arrangements that you've made, or is it still something that's nascent? I'm just curious to understand a bit more about that relationship.
Sure. If I may say that maybe it started at the beginning more on voluntary, because at one time, the philanthropists were kind of testing, what does an MDB or a financial institution do for us? I do recall, maybe many years ago, that we received requests from individuals, philanthropists, who wanted to do goodwill projects in Africa, like drilling of wells or building schools. They had the money, but unfortunately, they don't know the country. And then they were worried that this money may land in the wrong hands. So they came to the ISDB. They knew about the ISDB, that we do have the field presence. We can select project. We implement it with efficiency. And again, this issue about sustainability, etc. So they did put the trust on us. And then they wrote the check to the ISDB for us to implement projects from them in Africa and even in Indonesia and in many other areas. And here, I would also like to cite that there is at one time, used to be an anonymous donor, big donor in Saudi Arabia. And we had a program called Fa'il Khair, which is kind of like somebody who's a will-wisher or a will donor. Huge amount of funding, which was entrusted to ISDB, whereby we established a program. And until today, we're implementing lots of projects in many parts, in Bangladesh, in Palestine, in Africa. Even right now, we're talking about projects in Afghanistan. So to answer your question, Naila, now it's becoming more of a formal. So even now, we're engaged with UN organization, philanthropy in developing programs. So it's becoming like now it's part of the textbook, where now we're getting more and more into, like with UNICEF, with Al Ghurair Foundation in UAE, for a kind of like a children fund. Others, I mentioned the other one. And even, by the way, I'm handling a fund right now, which is the the Afghanistan Humanitarian Trust Fund, which was created back in 2022 in the aftermath of the situation in Afghanistan. And although this fund is being established through contribution from countries, member countries, non-member countries, private sector, and all of that, recently, we had a donor from Kuwait, and it's a philanthropist who knew about this fund, and they donated $2 million to the fund. And now we're doing a project for them, one in health, one of them is in water. And by the way, here I go back into climate, because the water project that we're doing in Afghanistan right now, which is drawing water to the households, using solar panel. Again, this is sort of, because of the situation.
Yeah.
It's more of using, clean energy because of the situation in Afghanistan. At the same time, it's not costly. At the same time, it's sustainable and durable. So again, that shows that, again, this linkage between philanthropy and ISTB is getting more and more, becoming more formal, and it's becoming another solid area of really helping member countries and societies in our agenda.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Benjamin. So, you represent this global network. You have a philanthropy for climate commitment that you guys have launched. You have over 600 signatories to this. So I think I would be very interested to understand from you and from your vantage point a little bit more about what do you think makes the best use of philanthropy's kind of unique position and agility and adaptability, and in taking some risks and having some high-risk capital, and its close relationship with civil society in making investment decisions and in policy making. How can public development banks make the best use of this kind of unique positioning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think part of the answer is in the question that is so well framed. I think that, as you said, indeed, philanthropic capital is very limited. It's really a drop in the ocean if you compare it to public capital or markets, etc. So the exceptional nature of it is that it's flexible, at least in theory. Then it doesn't mean that foundations and philanthropists necessarily always take advantage of the flexibility of their resources. Sometimes they impose a lot of restrictions by themselves, which are, I believe, unnecessary. But at least, technically speaking, it's totally flexible capital. It can be lost, it can be invested, it can fail. Things will just continue the same. It's not like a company, it's not like a government that is accountable to its citizens. So that is incredibly powerful, and so of course I think the examples that were just shared were very eloquent and excellent, just to show this complementarity of like smaller capital, but with this ability to test solutions, to innovate, and then to allow for scaling. So that is definitely something we need more of. I think when we hear these examples, I was glad to hear your example about some private philanthropists and donors, which I thought was really interesting, because most of the time the examples are, and I will say it's always, we have an agreement with the Gates Foundation, sometimes with the Rockefeller Foundation, and sometimes maybe with another similar massive US foundation, which has a similar size, is a bit of a comparable animal. So somehow it's a different sector, but they speak the same language, and they can say, okay, I put 100 million, you put 300 million, etc. And I think this is really important, and we need more of that, and there's still potential to have more of these kind of partnerships, because there are a number, especially in the US, a bit in Europe, and also now in emerging economies, some of these very big, endowed or not foundations. But I think what is really important to think about, and that's why we're so glad to engage with Finance in Common, with the AFD and others, as what we think is needed is to really scale out the partnership infrastructure. So that it doesn't rely just on signing an agreement between a specific bank and a specific foundation, but that we start first influencing the thinking, helping guide both development banks and philanthropies on how they can partner with each other, and so provide examples and provide guidance, etc. But also create the spaces, the coordination mechanisms at all levels, including at the local level. And in the case of FIC, since you represent also small local development banks or national, etc., then at all these levels, there's really a need and a great potential to create the spaces that will build the trust and the habit of working together between very different kinds of actors. And foundations, unfortunately, most of them, they don't have, their default setting is non-collaboration, because they have no pressure to collaborate, except the one they put on their own shoulders because they might have understood they need that to create greater impact. So the collaboration is not the norm, especially in practice. And so we need to create these incentives and these spaces where we can demonstrate the value of collaborating and how exciting it is for a foundation who sometimes might think, oh, I just have a small amounts of money. What can I bring to this huge organization with their billions? But actually to understand with good example and concretely that they can actually make a big difference because of their innovation capacity and also, as you mentioned, which is very important, their proximity to the issues, to the communities, their expertise, and sometimes their bridge builders abilities also, because they can be connected to business, they can be connected to civil society, they can play this bridge builder role. So we need to demonstrate that, and we need to create the spaces for that to happen. But that takes, it doesn't fall from the sky. So and there's very, very little investment from either public money or private or philanthropic capital even that would help really intentionally build that ecosystem for partnerships. And so just as a conclusion, this is what we're trying to do. Also, we issued, there was a paper by Fix on the no longer strangers between philanthropies and development banks. So it's a start to start identifying what are the ways we can partner and collaborate. And we hope that it will translate then in the future. It was also mentioned in the final communique of the last summit. And so what we hope is that there can be the creation also of a more permanent working group or some kind of space where that conversation continues in also very practical terms. And on our side, philanthropy and philanthropic networks, because WINGS is an association of philanthropic networks and support organizations, that 220 of them, and they serve 100,000 foundations around the world, a lot of them small or mid-sized, but some bigger. So on our side, helping to build that infrastructure, but we'll need investments for that to happen. So that's something we're working on and trying to convince more donors to help build that ecosystem.
Yeah, and so something you have been working on at WINGS and we've been working on at AFF and through WINGS funding is around this issue of enabling environment. Right? So everything that you're talking about requires some sort of environment that enables these partnerships to happen. And in many cases, I mean, at least I know from the Arab philanthropic sector, the lack of collaboration isn't necessarily an issue of people not wanting to do it or not having the will to do it, but it's having the space to do it. So I would just be curious to ask you, from this global perspective, if you had to give, two key things that philanthropies and philanthropy in general, a sector can do in an environment that it does not necessarily have the most kind of enabling space, what are some of the ways that they can?
Well, I would say the first thing is to try to help change that landscape. And I think by working through partnerships and with that angle of coming together with common goals, I think is a good ground to look at ways that the regulatory environment, the policy environment can be improved for more both domestic and sometimes international philanthropic funding to be available and to be used more effectively. And I know that there are things might evolve. I mean, I'm optimistic on that side because I think there's always energy to harness to improve the environment. We had interesting dialogue, and a few months ago, the UAE government convened a group of experts I was part of to talk about what can we do in order to create a more conducive environment for civil society and philanthropy in our country. It was a really interesting discussion, of course, because there's the balancing between security issues and development issues, but it was a really interesting dialogue, and there was a genuine interest to make improvements. So I would say the first thing is for foundations to, in a collaborative way, engage in dialogue with the institutions and try to see what are the things that can be improved for more of these resources to become available for the SDGs, climate, and all these goals. So that's the I would say that's maybe the main thing to do. Then, of course, other than that, is working in within the spaces that are already existent, well, certainly there's some good work to be done, as it was illustrated there. But of course, there will be much more to do if there was a more conducive space, and again, this infrastructure to make collaboration happen concretely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, that's also partially why I was asking Dr. Sati about the formalization of these relationships, because I think that's an amazing leveraging point for philanthropy, at least in the Arab region, right? To be able to then build these partnerships with established institutions that can also help in our advocacy for our own sector. So, Ivan, I'm going to turn it to you. So I'm going to read this very quick little question here. So in 2022, the Brazilian Development Bank published a notice to encourage the development of projects and programs with a financial structure that was based on a blended finance mechanism for support, and to support, among other things, a forest bioeconomy. So 11 projects were selected, leveraging over $260 million. And with Brazil soon taking over the G20 presidency, you're also part of the G20 presidency team, right? And using the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group to focus on private capital mobilization. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how we can mobilize new resources from the private sector that also involve philanthropic capital. And then what are some of the gaps that you see that we can use to make the best use of blended finance approaches?
Thank you very much for having me. Well, since yesterday, Brazil is at the presidency of the G20, so it's pretty much, I think, the first event I'm talking about being at the presidency. And definitely, this is quite timely. I think if there's an agenda that is going to be important during our presidency, is the one on sustainable finance. And right there, it is critical to really connect the dots. Just let me also invite you. We're going to have in our pavilion tomorrow, 1:30 p.m., an event on blended finance. And it's exactly because we understand that there are some dots that really need to be connected there. Be with the multilateral development banks, with the green funds, with philanthropies, and especially in how we can really leverage private sector mobilization in that process. So the Sustainable Finance Working Group of the G20 has this goal of really leveraging private sector mobilization for sustainable projects. And one thing that we thought would be really important to achieve that is really to connect, and that's why we're bringing this priority I'm about to tell you to the group. It's really to connect the money that we have, the public money that we have in the green funds. And if we take the four main ones, the CIFs, the Climate Investment Funds, the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environmental Facility, those four are really critical in that arena. And I work with those funds on a daily basis. I'm the undersecretary that is dealing with the banks and the funds at the Ministry of Finance of Brazil. So I assess the projects that we're going to send to the funds, we're the national authority for the GCF and so on. And it is absolutely hell to have any penny out of those funds. It takes too much time, too much effort for too little money. So there's something that is not really moving well in the finance architecture, in the climate finance architecture, but in the international architecture, let's say in general, that is, money is not getting to where it's needed and not in a timely manner. And I'm talking about a country as big as Brazil, with a bank and institutions as big as BNDES, our national bank, with plenty of knowledge when it comes to project preparation. And even with all that, we cannot get the money sometimes we have for the GCF, for example. And so we brought as a critical deliverable during our presidency for the Sustainable Finance Working Group the idea of having an expert panel that's going to bring us some recommendations on streamlining access to the four funds. So we want the money that is there and the money that is about to come. We're right now in a GCF replenishment period, so more than 10 billion are there now. So if you add to 10 to 11 billion, we understand that we have in those 4 funds right now that's not generating impact. So we're talking about 20 to 25 billion dollars in concessional money that could really go to the ground and make a difference all over the world. That in countries like Brazil, middle-income countries that also need concessional money in order to really go to where it is critical but not so easy to go. So we have plenty of good examples in Brazil how concessional money can be well applied and how we can generate impact in middle-income countries, especially if we're talking about also the agenda on mitigation. But obviously that's also for small islands, for low-income countries in Africa and all over the world. So we need money to get to the ground, to get to the projects, and the institutions need to be shaken somehow in order to get that. That's a critical aspect for our presidency. There is also this idea so we want to streamline access on the one hand. On the other hand, we want to assess instruments. And during the Indian presidency, we delivered in this specific group a technical assistance action plan, because also, especially for low-income countries, technical assistance is absolutely critical. You need to really go together with the country and really build a project and connect the dots with the financiers, but also on the ground. So, and in connecting to that TAP, as we called it, agenda, where we intend to create within the group what we're calling a nature-based solutions lab, where we want to go into details of successful cases where blended finance mechanisms were used in different scenarios, in different countries, and really take the instruments out of the cases and start to create a toolkit within the G20 where you can understand what kind of instruments, what kind of financial instruments can be better used for those sectors and those contexts. In a way, really also easing the process for poor countries in the process of getting the projects to be financed. So on the one hand, access, on the other hand, assistance and understanding of the instruments is going to be critical. But also, and it is well connected to the broader G20 priorities that President Lula has set, that the idea of reviewing international governance that is critical for the Brazilian presidency. We want to shake a little bit the multilateral development banks. I think there's also good momentum there. And there's also good momentum for the G20 to really take it seriously and digest ideas that can really push the banks in the midterm towards reforms that can generate impact. Also, the banks, they need to go faster. Brazil is a very important client of most of multilateral development banks, not for the Islamic Development Bank up to now, but maybe you could start conversations to be part of it. And, but also there, the banks are really lazy. It takes too much time, too much effort. And sometimes, especially in middle-income countries like Brazil, the banks are not really bringing the money to where it most needed. They tend to go to the easiest sectors, to the easiest projects, many times crowding out private sector investments, not crowding in. That's what we need. So in that sense, reviewing the way the multilateral development banks are dealing with that agenda is going to be critical. So we want to push for CAF, the Capital Adequacy Framework review implementation. That's going to be important. We're going to assess somehow also the idea of capitalization of the systems. Where do we need money in the system of the multilateral development banks and what for? But more importantly, I think two aspects of the roadmap we intend to deliver in our presidency for the MDB's reforms. That is operational review. So we want to make the banks easier to deal with from a client's perspective. So why I need too many patterns in order to deal with the same kind of energy project I have if I go to the World Bank of IDB or whatever. So you want really to, for a couple of specific points like ESG, procurement, also improving co-financing mechanisms among the banks is going to be quite important. And one thing we want to do is we want to do that together with the banks. So definitely we're going to have an independent expert panel. We're going to digest it within the G20, but we want to hear the banks. We want to hear the banks to get together. We could go faster, in fact. So we want to build an operational review that can be meaningful, impactful, and be delivered quickly. And in that sense, we're going to connect to the heads of MDB's group. And the Islamic Development Bank is there. So President Ilan from IDB is right now also at the presence of the heads of MDBs. We're going to connect a little bit the agenda they have there. And there's a good momentum there. The banks are really seeing, well, in fact, it is critical to deliver more and quickly so that we can go together. So a push from the G20 politically for, let's say, a systemic review, but also together with the banks, understanding where they can really go together and faster. And there's something that is critical there in the roadmap. So we have capital pillar, we have the operational pillar, and we have the impact assessment pillar. And that's also very critical. Not all the banks are really doing the best when it comes to that. And I think there's a long way to go. But we want to plant the seeds on how we can harmonize impact assessment in the system in a way that we can really maybe start a race to the top, creating some new mechanisms among the banks where we can understand also from a shareholder perspective, my dollar in a bank is generating more impact than in the other bank. And in that sense, really, from a systemic point of view, really pushing all the system up in order to do more and generate more impact. That's what's more important. So a long road ahead of us, I think, when it comes to that, but we want to plant the seed right there. And obviously, the agenda together with the banks is going to be very critical there, too.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. And you said something that reminded me of an intervention that Princess Nof made this morning we had a round table about this capacity, developing the capacity of technical capacity of philanthropy in general in order to kind of allow it to be a more present player. So I think that's a very interesting thing because you also mentioned this whole idea about technical capacity and kind of developing technical capacity. But then also in terms of philanthropy's role in that is that's one of the ways. I mean, her point was that is one of the ways that philanthropy can contribute to bringing more people to the climate agenda by developing their capacity. And then the more you have that, the more you'll be able to, at some point, hopefully also have enough people who are knowledgeable enough to be able to streamline some of these bottlenecks, right, that we're seeing. Okay, so we have a half hour to go, right, before we have to close out. So I want to open it to the floor, but just before I do that, I'm just going to go back and ask each one of you if you just have, a couple of words that you'd like to say to kind of close us out, looking more specifically at the importance of building these partnerships and what are some of the ways that we can create a more enabling space for these partnerships to thrive. So Adam, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. No, I'm going to give very brief. I think a lot has been said, but I just want to insist on 2 points. I think there is risks as well if we want to see these partnerships. We were speaking about the fragmentation we see in a public development bank space, mainly in the multilateral or international DFIs. So they would work in a silo, invest in the same projects, etc., etc. I think there is a risk also in the philanthropic area if we don't avoid that. So you may have corporate philanthropy also emerging, and the fact that we move from a humanitarian philanthropy to more business-oriented, where people invest in structural finance, etc., etc. I think it's also a way to just avoid that kind of fragmentation. So why I'm speaking about fragmentation in the philanthropic area? Because sometimes it goes with the wish of visibility when you invest in a project. So the brand name of the philanthropic person or its company goes with it. And that can bring also overfinancing of some projects in the same areas because you want the same visibility. To avoid that, I think on the collaboration space and the partnerships, philanthropy also has to rely on people that have the staff and the knowledge of the ground. Because you cannot also be in a way that you don't have unlimited resources somehow, because we are saving, of course, it's a lot of money. But it's not a money where you can put the World Bank or all the bank same stuff in front of them, right? So you need also to rely on the knowledge of those institutions and not go by yourself to make this one project in Mali or Brazil or in Singapore, I mean, in Asia somewhere. And it will be great for those people benefits. I mean, you have to do it, right? But it won't be at scale. So what I'm meaning there, so is the collaboration has to be on helping banks to also move faster. I agree on the fact that banks are late, and banks also think that the vertical constitutional funds are late. So I think one can learn to another. The agility, and we see within the philanthropic space is true. They are more agile because it's a smaller scale, and the decision process is quicker, etc., etc. So banks can learn by that. You know, by working with philanthropy, you have to move faster as well in your own process. So I think in that way, they are improving the work with banks. But I think also banks can bring something to the philanthropy, is the knowledge of the ground, and the fact that they can use €1 or $1 to make it 10. Because we have financial engineering process where the grant can just not be a grant, but can use to make buy-down facilities or engineering process where you can get more scale investment. And that also is a space where we should avoid risk by learning to each other.
Thank you. تفضل.
Just pick on what Adam mentioned. In our conversation with the Gates Foundation, humbly, there was a suggestion that, yes, grants money is, everybody loves grant money. It goes for a good cause. Nobody argued that. But sometimes, really, you have to slow down and try to kind of like hold the country or the beneficiary accountable by reducing grants and let them, again, learn and build capacity in there. As we always say, don't give me fish every day, but teach me how to fish. So this is just a good equation. Now, on just maybe to close on, regarding the climate, you know, the bank, the ISDB, is really committed to the climate action. Back in last year in COP27, there was a commitment by the bank, more than $13 billion will go into climate action when it goes to renewable energy, adaptation, mitigation, etc. Also, we partnered with what we call the Arab funds, you know, the Arab Coordination Group, into another endeavor of $24 billion when it comes to climate action, by the way. And a good part of that will go into energy transition, energy, clean energy, and all of that. We have set a target for 2025 that all our projects has to be green. And we have reached almost 32%, correct me, maybe colleagues there, 32%. We issue sukuk, and these are kind of like Islamic bonds. In the past, I think we have reached more than $5 billion sukuk, and now we're going into green sukuk, sustainability sukuk, and these types of sukuk, which really goes into the issue of climate, even going to address specific needs for specific societies. A cross-cutting, now this issue about adaptation, climate adaptation, is really coming cross-cutting in everything that we do. I give an example, even the small project that we're doing in countries like Afghanistan, all of that, we're mindful about, you know, the adaptation and also renewable and all of that. Final word about philanthropy, and since we give example. We have to really admit that philanthropists have to play, or they will play, a very strong role in connecting businesses, financial institutions, private sector, civil society. They have a big voice in there. It's not only about the money, it's also about, you know, like they're creative, they want to see innovation, they want to break the tradition that we in the IFIs and the financial institution. So we encourage that, and I think I have given good examples about, the increasing trust of philanthropy. And I think maybe I had mentioned, and the colleague mentioned trust. I think it's very important for a philanthropy to deal. I think the colleagues mentioned, why should a philanthropy come and work with a financial institution? It is the trust, it is the delivery, and also it's the efficiency and the effectiveness. And by the way, at the beginning, I recall in the LLF and all of that, we did have shortfalls, but I think we kept learning. And the attestation is that we're going into phase 2 is attestation that there is trust, where you have a philanthropy like the Gates Foundation, you have a humanitarian organization, you have some development institution. Finally, just to give an example, in Yemen also right now, we have been approached by a well-wisher, Yemeni, who wants to do a health, fund in Yemen. And then they want to work with ISDB because of the trust and all of that. We're now structuring some sort of fund for health. It's coming from philanthropists in Saudi Arabia. They're Yemenis, but they care about their countries. However, they feel that they can trust the bank in there. So at the end of the day, all what we do, when it comes to financing, blending, co-financing, generating opportunities, it goes really to serve, the SDGs, achieving the SDGs in all kind of shapes and forms. At the same time, again, adhering to the climate action and adaptation and mitigation, etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Benjamin.
Yes, well, that was really interesting to hear all the complementary perspectives. I think from my perspective, it's really about reinforcing the need for us to, as you said, document what works, the best practices, and try to understand different types of partnerships in different kinds of contexts, so that we can focus on that. Because otherwise, the risk is that we remain, I'm speaking for us as Wings, as network of philanthropy, that we remain in the more abstract and in just the idea that yes, we want to partner with these other partners, but then in terms of making it a reality, again, beyond the very few, very big foundations that have the means to do it, but making it a more shared reality across the sector, we need to have a better understanding of how it can be done, at what scale, what cannot be done, and we should just then not even try to do it and lose energy and time. So there's a bit of research, documentation to do, and we're interested in what you're finding out, because I know that in what you'll do around blended finance, of course, some of them will have involved philanthropic capital. So especially around these cases, we're interested to learn, because also on our side as Wings, we want to document examples of successful multi-stakeholder partnerships. Another thing we want to do, and it's more about helping actually, in this case, development banks, by sharing the perspective also of philanthropy, of how they can partner with us, so that they also gain time and can focus their energy in terms of building these partnerships. So almost like technical assistance and guidance and content for development banks on how to partner with our sector is something we're planning to do. And a third point is I was referring to the need to build this local infrastructure and coordination mechanisms. So at Wings, we're not a foundation, we're a network. We have some resources from the European Union, and part of these resources will be distributed to our members in the Global South or emerging economies, including for some coordination projects, so that we can help seed the creation of these mechanisms that will bring together development banks, government, private sector, philanthropy, civil society around the table, and be able to join, to build this trust first. I think it's the first step, as you said, and then identify opportunities to pool funds and also to share learnings. I mean, the partnerships is not just about blending finance, it's not just about cash, but there's a lot more that can happen if we create the space for that. So this is, again, something we're committed to accelerating at Wings. And we were just talking about also similar things around G20 and how also to have more of a collective voice of the philanthropic sector at the table at G20 as a parallel to what we're discussing on development banks. So that's something we're committed to, and we hope will accelerate, because we keep saying, time is running out, and it is. So we really need to be very, very intentional and act with urgency in making these collaborations the norm.
Yeah. Thank you, Ivan.
The critical point I think about, and really going back to what Adama said, is about reassessing risk, right? So, and that's something I think at the very heart of our agenda on the finance track of the G20. So it really has to do with pushing the banks to do more, because look, you can do more with the capital you have, you can take more risks, you have a AAA, but a long way until you lose that AAA. So how about doing more with the capital you have? That's the CAF review that we have right now. We're not going to push on that. The CRAs, the credit rating agencies, are really important in the system. So a dialogue that the G20 has started, AAA shareholders are having, the banks are having with them, is very important there, so that we can really get to know better, and data is critical there. In fact, the world of data is absolutely critical, because even for things that we understand that, well, we know what it is, no, we don't know exactly what it is, and that's why we assess risk the way we assess right now. That's why things like GEMS, the database on emerging markets and developing countries is so important, really, and we support the idea of having GEMS as a standalone institution, so that we can really reinforce data and getting to know, especially developing countries, so that we could maybe push even further the agenda we have from the banks. Assessing risk is also very important for the other stakeholders, for the funds, and maybe a call for philanthropies also. I had this very good conversation with the private sector in São Paulo, the capital city, let's say the economic capital of Brazil, 2 weeks ago. It was part of an agenda preparing for the G20, since we're going to have this very important agenda on sustainable finance, where we want to leverage private sector. Let's hear from the private sector. That's what we have started to do, and that's what we intend to do throughout our G20 presidency, especially for the Sustainable Finance Working Group. And something I heard in São Paulo, maybe you also heard that, you're based there, so you get to know well, is that when we talk about philanthropies, and we were in an event that was really focused on nature-based solutions, so plenty of interesting projects in the Amazonian region or in the Cerrado region, dealing with land use, how to keep the forest up, or maybe dealing with degraded land and so on. And the entrepreneurs were there, the guys that are really trying to make it, that went to the Amazonian region 10 years ago and started a project. And it is absolutely difficult to get the money. Also because the way the financial system deals with guarantees and how they assess risks is absolutely not taking into account the value of nature there. So how come can you really rethink about local development in the Amazonian region, for example, and deal with the very small farmer or explorer of the Amazonian forests that deals with seeds or things like that? They don't have a house, they don't have a car, they don't have an account. And how can you really bring those communities that are essential to keep the Amazonian forest up into the system and really deal with loans and so on? And that's, I think, something for the philanthropists to think about. Is maybe there is a gap there that you need to go a little bit further, not really just to maybe mix a little bit more money from philanthropies into the financial system, so that that melting pot could somehow end up in a way that we could bring down risks and access those that are there that do not have any guarantees to be part of the system. Because there in São Paulo, like 2 weeks ago, I heard that a lot. But you know, philanthropists, they don't want to go to take risks. They don't want to connect to production like ours. You have some entrepreneurs there. So those are the dots I think we need to connect: public money, private money, public money from the banks, well leveraged, as Adama mentioned, but also maybe a push for the philanthropic capital to really change a little bit how they assess risks in their own way and connect better to the other stakeholders and really make a change when it comes to, especially I think for those really hard to get sectors or communities, and that are really critical, in fact, for the agenda we're dealing with here at COP. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what makes this kind of conversation so critical, at least for me, so I thank you all very much for all of these incredible interventions, is that, you know, this is not an easy conversation to bring to a network when it's not your expertise and it's not, you know, I'm not a climate scientist, what do I know about climate? But we know that it's something that we have to address. We know that we represent a sector that absolutely has to step up and address this crisis. And so all of these interventions that you guys have offered have been really helpful, at least to be able to see, okay, the strengths that we know this sector has is its agility, its proximity to the communities that it serves, the flexibility that it has in creating partnerships that break down, you know, that don't necessarily have, like you were saying, Adama, that don't have these kind of bureaucratic systems and processes in place. And it's something that's so critical for us to leverage. And then I think it's also really, really important to note, and again, this is why I'm very thankful to the Islamic Development Bank for giving us the space to have this conversation, is that having philanthropy at, you know, philanthropic voices and, you know, all of us being able to have these conversations with philanthropy being on the agenda as something key to these conversations is an evolution, right? I mean, this has not been the case in COP in the past. And so I think it's, you know, it's a really critical breakthrough that we've been able to come and officially be part of an agenda to have these conversations, to be able to take this incredible insight from all of you. So Bradley, I'm going to hand it back over to you to close out the session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Nyla. I'm sure you'll agree that this has been a rich discussion and a sharing of a wealth of knowledge up here on the stage. So thank you so much to the panelists. And I also think that there's a need to keep this discussion going. As you say, this is sort of a first step, but not the last step for sure. So thank you so much to Nyla, to Adama, Engineer Al-Sati, Benjamin and Ivan. And I won't take up much more of your time, but I think Benjamin just has some very brief closing remarks. Is that correct?
Oh.
Or, yeah, questions or comments from the audience, I think. Any burning questions out there? Yes, okay.
Thank you. Maybe just comments. So my name is Dauden Jai. I am the manager of the climate change division within the bank, ISDB. So on the issues related to the role of MDBs and how they can support, and the good example provided on nature-based solutions. So the MDBs are looking at, and this is based from the G20 work on how to support country platforms. And these country platforms, they include different sectors, including the whole idea of nature, how can we value nature, and how can countries take the lead. But the key word is country-led. So it's country-led. So you're mentioning the vertical funds, you're mentioning the MDBs and other financiers, but the role of the country is key. And I think for the next G20 round, there will be this emphasis as well on the role of the countries to make sure that we are more able to help them. We are experiencing it. I mean, we are collaborating. Right now, the ISDB is kind of coordinating the MDBs. So we, on climate, the working group on climate, and you can see how difficult it is at the MDB level to coordinate. So the coordination has to be at the country level on what is needed. The whole chain has to be coordinated at the country level so that the different partners can come and collaborate in country. So that's the message I wanted to share, and hopefully during the discussions at the G20, we hope that this will be taken into account. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Dauda. We can provide an opportunity for responses perhaps, but are there any other questions people would like to raise? Yes?
Okay, thanks very much for the discussions. Indeed, it's a very good opportunity to bring concessional or philanthropy into this discussion on climate finance. My question is actually, maybe Benjamin has already mentioned, is actually, have you ever observed some sector trends in, for instance, where philanthropy money actually goes, where most of the sectors actually observed most of the money? So my question actually is because my understanding or feeling is that this philanthropy money is kind of being spread all over, like very fragmented. It doesn't really have like a sectoral kind of focus, and then for that it's difficult to make it up to scale, and for that it is also very difficult to partner with private sector, for instance, to be focused in like also to kick off the blended financing or attract more private money. It is all over the place. So it's kind of like, yeah, so my question is, do you have observed any sectorial trends, or do you anticipate if there's anything that can be done in this area that you probably can pick up several sectors that you think will make an impact, so all the money should actually go there and then scale up, or attract more private capital? Thank you.
I mean, that's what I was also trying to highlight in the conversation, is that we need to enlarge a bit the vision from the very, very, very small minority of big funders that it's possible and not easy, but it's like relatively easy to work with and align with when you're a public development bank or a multilateral development bank. But then if we really want to harness the potential of the sector, we need to learn how to work with not necessarily the very small ones, because that will be difficult, but for, let's say, the mid-size and mid-size foundations. And for that, we need these coordination mechanisms that could bring more than one, that could bring 10, 15, 20 in one, at the country level. I think it was a good point, and I think probably country level is the most relevant, or sometimes regional level, where they can align priorities and discuss what they could do together more than one-to-one like this. So there's this, in terms of trend, there are trends, but I don't think this solves the issue, because even within a trend, let's say, well, in Brazil, for example, the big majority of funding, and I think it's the case probably also in this region, you'll tell me, but is going to education. It's the main sector that receives funding from foundations and philanthropy is education. I think it's probably the biggest one worldwide. And then you have like health and culture, and then a number of other things. But even within these trends, you have a fragmentation, as you said, of where the money is going, how. And there's no habit of working together. So there's a lot of work to be done. And it will not be possible for the entire field and all of the hundreds of thousands of foundations around the world. We're talking about at least 250,000 foundations around the world. So, and we said 522 banks. So of course, like it's not. But again, being able to understand within that big sector what is possible to do in terms of actual coordination, and then building the spaces for that partnership to happen. So I don't know if I responded to your point, but yeah.
On that, I think what we are observing as banks is also that you have philanthropies also knowing that there is so much money going in places sometimes that they have already solutions or growing solution existing. So that's where you have to distinguish among the 2,000 and plus. Many of them are really small, and those who are at scale, right? So those, if you take the big foundations that are speaking about hundreds of millions or or billions, you don't have hundreds of them. So that's those who are matching with the banks. So, and in this space, what we are hearing is that they want to be more and more systemic. So they want to push agendas that can go in a scale that are relevant for the debates we have. So climate finance is one of them. I've heard a lot, more philanthropies wanted to be focused on biodiversity, but creating conditions for banks to invest in biodiversity. And I think that's the right way also to go in the process. So it's not just to go by yourself invest, but enabling the space for more investment. I think it's useful. And by that, there is the issue about technical assistance, of course. And while we are speaking about technical assistance, you don't have the knowledge, even if you are a banker. Financing is a knowledge, but financing biodiversity is a one specific topic. If you don't have the knowledge of it, you cannot do it. And while we are speaking of risk is about knowledge. Philanthropists, sometimes they don't want to go in some areas in Brazil because they don't know it, right? So someone has to lay the ground, because you know the ground, to help them assess that and have the knowledge and then capitalize. That's where also the collaboration, I think, should be fostered. And the other recommendation I have, and this is a call, many times we are speaking about the fact that money exists, but we don't have projects. Because many times those projects are prepared from Washington, Paris, Belgium, etc., Belgium or Brussels, etc. Ground projects preparations. I think that's also where philanthropies can be useful, helping either national banks or state-owned entities to prepare their projects, and not to give them money to do one project, but just solutions where they can have technical process where they can prepare projects for others to invest. And I think that's also a way to create the investment condition for those who are on the private sector or public money to bring financing. So I may say, focusing on what is at scale, making technical assistance for even financiers, and also bring local conditions of financing. And of course, make emergence of local philanthropy as well, because they know what they are in their country, and often they want to help their own country, because local philanthropy also can be useful in this process.
Excellent. I think that brings us pretty close to the end of time. As I said, I jumped the gun there a little bit before, but I might pass across to Benjamin just for a final word, if you'd like to, on behalf of Wings, on this event. And
well, sure. Well, very easy. The final word would be thank you, and thanks. No, absolutely. No, we're glad that AFF and NILA are taking the lead in pushing for these conversations. Glad to partner with you at ISDB for this important discussion, and lots of next steps to follow up on at G20 with FIX and future COPs. So it was a great dialogue. Thank you so much for convening us and for having us, and thanks to all of you for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for making this happen. Oh, sorry, a microphone.